The camera opens on darkness, pierced only by the faint echo of a single heartbeat. A flash of white light explodes, revealing Michael Jackson mid-moonwalk, frozen in silhouette, as if time itself has paused to ask how far one man can glide. Most people will tell you that Michael's genius lived in his feet, in his elastic falsetto, in the glittering glove that dazzled a billion eyes, but the real secret they won, whispered in boardrooms and bank vaults, lived quietly inside his notebook, where he jotted catalog numbers, royalty, percentages, and the names of rival bidders, who never guessed he was coming. Tonight, we travel beyond the lights of the stage and descend into the corridors of contracts and copyrights, where the currency is intellectual property and the moves are choreographed in decimal points. It is 1981. Michael is 23, raven-haired, soft-spoken, and already richer than his childhood self ever dared to imagine. Yet, at a London dinner with Paul McCartney, as the two superstars laugh over stories of touring mishaps and fans fainting in front rows, Paul offers an unsolicited piece of advice. If you want to sleep well in this business zone, publishing, that's where the real money is. The older Beatles speaks from experience. He owns a small stack of song rights that pay him silently every time a jukebox needle kisses vinyl. Michael listens, nods, but says little. In his mind, a door has opened. Behind it lies a kingdom of melodies that paid dividends long after applause dies. Cut to Los Angeles. 1984 Thriller is dismantling every chart record in sight. Reporters sprint from radio stations to record shops with fresh superlatives. Accountants freeze as 8-digit numbers recalibrate their spreadsheets. Amid the frenzy, a rumor floats through the industry. A TV, Music the Catalog, that contains virtually every Lennon-McCartney composition is for sale. Its asking price, $47.5 million, is outrageous by any metric of the era. Corporations sniff but hesitate, labeling it overvalued nostalgia. Michael, ensconced inside his Encino home with business lawyer John Branca, leans forward, eyes bright. "That's the Beatles' songs," he says, as if identifying a constellation no telescope had ever seen. Branca explains the mountain of due diligence ahead. Song valuations, mechanical royalties, synchronization rights, international currencies, currency hedges, tax shelters. Michael barely flinches. He wants the mountain. Negotiations stretch across continents. Australian tycoon Robert Holmes, court sweeps in with deep pockets. Charles Koppelman, a seasoned publisher, circles like a shark. Reporters giggle at the audacity of a 25-year-old pop star challenging Wall Street. When a rival executive calls Michael's interest cute, Branca relays the insult. Michael lifts an eyebrow, releases a gentle laugh, and replies with 2 words that will echo for decades. "I'll buy." The signing takes place on a gray August morning in 1985, while fans outside the hotel lobby clutch. "I love you, Michael," boasters. He quietly inks a contract that transfers 4,000 songs into his control, including "I Want to Hold Your Hand," "Hey Judah," and "Yesterday" melodies etched into the cultural DNA of half the planet. Reporters scramble for quotes. Some call it a betrayal of friendship with McCartney. Others predict financial ruin. Michael retreats to the back seat of a limousine, opens a window just enough to feel the city air, and smiles at the silence that will soon turn into perpetual song. Every time a commercial uses a Beatles tune, every time a film rolls credits under Let It Be, every beep of a ringtone that carries a Lennon-McCartney hook will deposit money into his future. The next decade unfolds like a chess match played at lightning speed. Sony Corporation, hungry to consolidate global music rights, approaches with an offer Michael cannot ignore. A joint venture that values the catalog at hundreds of millions and wires $90 million into his accounts, tax-advantaged, in exchange for half ownership. Critics gasp that he is selling his crown jewel. Michael studies the term sheet, noting the clauses that keep veto power in his pocket. The accelerated payouts, the guarantee that Sony will spend its own billions to buy complementary catalogs while he retains half of everything acquired. In 1995, the handshake seals a partnership that transforms a risky gamble into an asset valued north of $1 billion. Yet the tabloids never understand. They followed the rhinestone glove to Neverland Zoo, photographed the Ferris wheel, and scribbled declarations of bankruptcy when Michael mortgaged the ranch. They fail to notice that the music catalog's annual cash flow now dwarfs the interest on every loan. They carp about eccentric spending while ignoring the compound growth of copyrights in a world hurtling toward digital distribution. A&MD master vault of unreleased Jackson tracks that he cataloged, indexed, and insured like a future bailout fund. Then, June 25, 2009, news anchors freeze fans collapse under the weight of sudden absence. Michael Jackson is gone, but the empire he architected remains, humming like a silent engine. Within weeks, estate executors convert rehearsal footage into a concert film. This is it, grossing $250 million. Cirque du Soleil pitches an immersive show that will tour the globe for a decade. Streaming platforms erupt, sending royalties higher than they stood during Michael's final tour. In 2016, the estate sells its half of the Sony ATV venture for $750 million and exit strategy. Michael had imagined years before when he insisted on the buy-sell clause. Today, accountants tally the estate's value at over $1 billion. Rumors whisper that unreleased songs, image and likeness rights, and forthcoming biopics could double that figure by 2030. Michael Jackson's name remains fused to choreography and costume, but beneath the sequins lives a financier's mind that understood one immutable truth. Art may be ephemeral, but ownership is forever. In the next chapter, we will journey through the whirlwind weeks of 1985, when a single fax, a red-eyed overnight flight, and an audacious young superstar collided to wrest the Beatles' catalog from corporate titans and in doing so redrew the boundaries of music industry power. It began with a dinner that should have been ordinary. London, autumn of 1981. Michael Jackson, fresh from recording sessions for what would become Thriller, accepted Paul McCartney's invitation to a quiet table at the Dorchester. The room flickered with candlelight and silver cutlery. But what mattered was the conversation to megastars swapping stories about screaming crowds and studio tricks. Until Paul, almost as an afterthought, said the future, Michael, isn't in touring. It's in the songs themselves. Own the publishing, and you own tomorrow. Michael nodded, filed the sentence away like a secret chord, and changed the subject to bass lines and Beatles. Yet something inside him clicked, the way a locked tumbler snaps just before a door swings wide. 2 years later, Thriller roared across every chart on Earth, and Michael's nights were a carousel of cameras, confetti, and limousine windows fogged by the breath of fans. Still, amid the chaos, he devoted mornings to reading trade journals. That was when the rumor surfaced. ATV Music, holder of the entire Lennon-McCartney catalog, more than 250 Beatles compositions, plus thousands of additional copyrights, was quietly for sale. The asking price, whispered through industry corridors, was $47.5 million. A sum so staggering that corporate giants shook their heads and walked away. In boardrooms, they called it sentimental madness. In Michael's mind, it sounded like destiny's price tag. He phoned John Branca, the Sharperty entertainment lawyer who had already negotiated his Pepsi deal. "John," he said, voice soft but steady, "I want the Beatles songs, all of them." Branca hesitated only for a breath, then began assembling a war room inside his Beverly Hills office. Overnight, he pulled economists, copyright analysts, even statisticians who specialized in jukebox data. They spread ledgers across a walnut conference table and calculated that, at current performance and mechanical rates, a TV grossed roughly $7 million a year. On paper, the asking price was still rich, but they projected MTV's exploding sync market, the coming CD boom, and international tariff changes that would lift earnings by double digits within 5 years. Branca ran the numbers twice more, then called Michael back. "It's bold, but it works." Bold did not begin to describe the weeks that followed. The seller Australian tycoon, Robert Holmes, a court favored, a straightforward corporate buyer, not a 25-year-old performer with a pet chimpanzee and a penchant for buying never-ending Ferris wheels. Competing bids arrived from Charles Koppelman's publishing group and Britain's Thorn Emy. Jackson, undeterred, asked Branca to draft a letter of intent that matched the full asking price, but included 2 strokes of genius. He would pay cash, over staggered installments to keep pressure off liquidity, and he would retain Holmes Court's top administrators for a transition period. soothing shareholder nerves. The offer reached Australia by fax at dawn. By twilight, word leaked to the Los Angeles Times. Talk radio laughed. Michael Jackson buying the Beatles. Cute. Cute. Michael heard the clip on his car stereo, smiled beneath dark aviators, and instructed the driver to take him to the studio. He had vocals to finish, deals to orchestrate, due diligence unfolded like a thriller subplot. Attorneys sifted stacks of yellowing contracts, signed in Hamburg basements in 1962, sub-publishing agreements buried in Tokyo filing cabinets, and performance licenses still denominated in Deutschmarks. Each discovery became a chess piece. A forgotten clause granted renewal rights on half the catalog beyond 1990, adding millions in latent value. Another identified television themes no one had exploited since the 1960s. Michael digested every memo, sometimes calling Branca past midnight to ask whether Oblada fetched more in German beer ads than in American sitcoms. When Branca answered, Micah chuckled softly, fascinated by the invisible life of songs. July 1985. Bidding escalated. Thornimi inched to $40 million. Coupleman countered. Homsacourt stalled for a premium. Branca boarded the Concorde to London with a sealed envelope authorizing him to top any rival by $2 million. Capped at 47.5. Negotiations stretched 48 sleepless hours inside a Mayfair townhouse that smelled of aged cognac and nervous sweat. At dawn on the third day, Holmes, Kurit's lawyer, pushed the contract across the table. Branca signed initialed every margin and wired the first tranche before breakfast. The Beatles catalog, plus 3,500 additional songs from Little Richard hits to the theme from Jeopardy, belonged to Michael Jackson. Outside, the London air tasted like rain and gasoline. Branca phoned Michael, who was rehearsing dance steps in Los Angeles. "It's done," he said. Silence hung for a beat. Then Michael replied, "Wonderful, John. Now let's make it grow. No champagne. No trumpet blast, just." The next directive. The press reacted with predictable frenzy. Headlines screamed betrayal. Jackson snatches Beatles from McCartney. Tabloids accused him of exploiting friendship. Pundits predicted financial ruin. Paul McCartney himself expressed disappointment on morning television, saying he had hoped the catalog would come back to the family. Michael offered no public rebuttal. Privately, he mailed Paul a letter explaining that business was business and suggesting they collaborate on future ventures. The relationship cooled, but Michael believed time and royalties would vindicate him. They did, and quickly. Within 18 months, a TV license revolution to Nike for $500,000 on. Unprecedented fee for a single commercial. Purists gasped, but cash registers rang. MTV placements followed. Then Blockbuster films, video games, greeting cards, even karaoke machines across Southeast Asia. Annual income doubled, then tripled. By 1989, the catalog's valuation surpassed $250 million. By 1993, analysts whispered every new format CD, minidisc. Digital download opened another spigot. Whenever the tabloids claimed Michael was teetering toward bankruptcy, accountants quietly deposited 8-figure royalty checks into his accounts. Yet the most visionary stroke was still ahead. Michael knew leverage was the true choreography of finance. In 1995, he negotiated a 50/50th joint venture with Sony, turning over half the catalog in exchange for roughly $90 million in cash, and a clause that any future acquisitions under Sony ATV would also be halfies. Critics said he had sold the crown jewels. Michael pocketed the cash, kept veto power, and gained a corporate Goliath to multiply his asset at its own expense. It was like selling a slice of the golden goose while ensuring it laid more eggs, all stamped with his initials. But that is a tale for the next act. For now, picture the young man who once danced across Motown 25, gloves sparkling, hearing applause roar in his ears even as he calculated publishing splits in his head. Picture him standing alone in a control room, playback speakers hissing, signing a wire transfer that would rewrite music industry mathematics. In that moment, Michael Jackson ceased to be merely the world's most electrifying performer. He became, unequivocally, one of its shrewdest financiers, proving that melody is not just art, but equity, that a song can moonwalk across balance sheets long after its singer takes his final bow. And so, as the last notes of yesterday fade into studio silence and the ink on a $47.5 million contract dries, the Empire takes its first true shape-a kingdom of copyrights, humming in the dark, earning while the world sleeps, waiting for the next strategic PID to with Sony that will propel the story into billion-dollar territory. The winter rain that drummed across Los Angeles in January 1992 sounded nothing like applause. Michael Jackson stood at a penthouse window overlooking Century City, watching droplets spider down the glass as accountants murmured behind him. Dangerous had cost a fortune to make 9 producers, dozens of engineers, orchestras recorded on 3 continents, and the world tour about to launch would swallow tens of millions more in staging, freight, and insurance. To the tabloids, the numbers looked ominous. Rumors of cash flow, strained plastered headlines. In truth, Michael still slept on a pillow stuffed with equities and catalog royalties, but he felt a pinch all the same. Art demanded capital, and capital in turn demanded leverage. Across the Pacific, in a Tokyo boardroom paneled with cedar so fragrant it perfumed every suit sleeve, Sony Music chairman Norio Oga traced a finger along a bar graph. Global record sales were roaring, yet competition to sign talent had become a bonfire that devoured margins. What Sony lacked was not. Artisette owned the stables of Springsteen, Dylan, and Mariah Carey, but publishing. Without robust publishing, Sony paid other companies every time its own artists sang someone else's words. Oga's finger stopped at an upward spike labeled a TV catalog. The figure beside it, $400 million projected valuation made. Even the chairman exhaled. Sony wanted half of that engine badly enough to risk embarrassment if negotiations leaked. So, 2 quests converged. Michael's need for liquidity that would not surrender control, and Sony's need for ownership that would not ignite shareholder revolt. The first meeting took place in New York's Four Seasons Hotel, its carpets so thick they muted even nervous footsteps. Michael arrived veiled in sunglasses and a fedora. The Sony delegation arrived armored in pinstripes and Harvard MBA. Still, within minutes, the conversation turned playful. Michael spoke in soft bursts about melodies becoming living creatures. The bankers counted in spreadsheets about earnings before interest and tax. Yet both languages described the same truth. Future cash. John Branca, resurrected as Michael's chief counsel after a brief estrangement, took the negotiations into a Manhattan townhouse whose walls were pinned with financial flowcharts that looked like constellations. The proposal that emerged was daring. Sony would pay Michael roughly $90 million up front, assume half ownership of ATV, and fold it into a new joint venture called Sony ATV Music Publishing. Michael, holding exactly 50%, would possess veto rights over any sell-off, acquisition, or licensing deal that might discolor his vision. In effect, he gained 9 figures in cash while still steering the ship out. Crucially, any catalog Sony purchased in the future would flow into the joint venture, half owned by him at no additional cost. Critics barked from the sidelines. "He's given away the Beatles." Talk radio hosts howled. An artist should never merge with a corporation. Op-ed writers scolded, but buried inside the term sheet were clauses few outsiders read. Should Sony ever wish to exit the venture, Michael held a buy-sell option. He could force Sony to purchase his share at a sky-high multiplier, or compel him to sell him theirs at the same rate. Either road led to a jackpot. When the ink dried in August 1995, Michael stepped from Sony's Madison Avenue lobby into a rush of summer humidity he had not felt during weeks of air-conditioned haggling. Camera flashes detonated. Questions He merely smiled and climbed into a waiting limousine whose leather smelled ironically like a recording booth on mixdown night. Inside, Branca handed him a thin folder titled Next. The joint venture, flushed with corporate credit, was already stocking new catalogs. Lieber and Stoller Motown's Joe Beat Library, Phil Collins Publishing, and the sleeper trove called Famous Music that contained the theme from Spy Men and the soundtrack to The Godfather. Michael flipped the pages like a child skimming a comic book. humming with the possibilities. Every new acquisition would double in value the moment it landed, because half now belonged to him, purchased with Sony's money. Success announced itself quietly at first in the metallic thunk of a mailbox lid dropping quarterly statements that listed 8-digit royalty totals. But the press only heard the cymbal crash of spectacle. A shopping spree in Bahrain, a pet store emptied for Neverland, a diamond-studded wristwatch rumored to cost the GDP of a small island. Debt, they declared, must be choking him. How else to explain refinancing deals with Barclays, Citi, and Bank of America? What only a handful of lawyers understood was that the loans were structured against the catalog of soaring equity, a pulley system that let Michael borrow at single-digit interest while the underlying asset appreciated at double digits. He was, in effect, using tomorrow's royalties to build today's stage sets, knowing the math would outrun the spotlight. Then came 2005. Allegations erupted, prosecutors circled, and television trucks laid siege to the Santa Maria courthouse. The spectacle threatened to swallow more than reputation. It threatened liquidity. Legal fees alone spiked past $20 million, and the banking syndicate grew jittery. Yet the catalog remained an iron wall, even at the trial, as ugliest hour when primetime anchors predicted ruin. Internal valuations tagged Sony, a TV, above $1 billion. Bankers who not 6 months earlier had courted Michael now spoke of margin calls, but they spoke quietly, because no one wanted to trigger a fire sale whose smoke might alert rivals eager to pounce. One afternoon, during a recess, Michael retreated to a trailer parked behind the courthouse. There, away from gavel echoes and fevered whispers, he dialed Sony CEO Andrew Lack. A court sketch artist would later report seeing him smile for the first time that day. The call was short. Lack assured him the joint venture remained intact. Licensing deals were still landing. The machine was bigger than the circus. Michael returned to the courtroom steadier, as if bolstered by invisible sheet music only he could hear. Acquittal came in June. Reporters, robbed of a villain, pivoted to financial autopsy. Surely, they insisted, Jackson would have to sell the Beatles now. But summer passed, autumn followed, and no sale materialized. Instead, Sony ATV purchased the country powerhouse, locking up Hank Williams' catalog, and inked a co-publishing agreement with Eminem. Each headline announcing his supposed downfall was countered by a publisher's notice listing him as co-owner of another classic song. It became almost comic. Rumors of ruin functioned as a drumbeat to which the empire marched forward. By 2008, Spotify's beta test in Sweden hinted at a streaming future. Ringtones in Asia generated micropayments that aggregated into tens of millions. And Michael, ever the futurist, authorized research into holographic performance long before metaverse entered dictionaries. Yet his physical health waned, and the Dizzysit tour was conceived as both comeback and celebration. AIG advanced him funds. The estate insured itself, and 75 million fans registered for ticket lotteries. The machine was primed for its loudest roar to fall silent with his sudden death in June 2009. Death, however, could not annul the contracts Michael had once read by lamplight, while engineers tweaked snare drums in the next room. The buy-sell clause with Sony remained alive, and the estate executors understood its latent power. They nurtured the joint venture through the global recession, watched streaming revenues quadruple, then in 2016 exercised the clause. Sony would purchase Michael's 50% for $750 million in cash. Some fans mourned the goodbye, but the estate's advisors knew the catalog had done its job. It had shielded its architect through scandal, financed his art through market winters, and in the moment of farewell, filled the coffers so completely that the estate could diversify into film, Broadway artificial intelligence ventures, and renewable energy portfolios that will outlive even vinyl nostalgia. The rain that once tapped on Michael's 1992 window had long since evaporated. But if you stand beneath the marquee lights of Broadway's Neil Seaman Theater on a summer night and hear the opening chord of Beat It thunder through the crowd, you may feel a mist on your face. It is the spray of compounding interest, the residue of a strategy spun from risk, nerve, and a conviction that art's truest costume is ownership. The Sony power play was never a surrender. It was a pas de deux in which Michael led a corporate giant across a dance floor painted in gold copyrights, then dipped it at the perfect beat bowing as the audience gasped some in admiration. Some inhalaram while the orchestra kept playing songs. He half-uned until the very last note. In the next and final chapter, the spotlight shifts to the custodians who inherited that orchestra. Tuning old instruments for a digital amphitheater, probing the frontiers of holograms, NFTs, and a biopic that promises to resurrect the legend yet again. They will discover, as Michael once did, that melodies age. But the ledger does not. The phone call arrived at 2:26 p.m. on June 25, 2009. John Branca was in his office, reviewing a licensing agreement when his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Steadier than the words deserved, Michael has collapsed at his home. Paramedics are en route. Branca's pen froze mid-signature in the seconds that followed before confirmation. Before the avalanche of media hysteria, his lawyer's mind had already pivoted to a single question. What happens to the machine now? By evening, the world knew. Michael Jackson was gone. Social media fractured under the weight of collective grief. Radio stations looped his greatest hits in a kind of musical wake. Ticket scalpers began refunding sums for a This Is It tour that would never commence. Yet, in a quiet Los Angeles conference room, two executors, John Branca and John McClane, sat, facing a tidal wave of legal, financial, and ethical complexity that no eulogy could contain. The estate owed debts. It faced immediate liquidity crises. Tax authorities circled, and hovering above it all was a catalog worth nearly $1 billion, now frozen by probate law, and questions of market timing that would make or break the inheritance of Michael's 3 children. The first decision was urgent. AEG Live, the promoter backing This Is It, held footage of 50 nights of rehearsal hours of Michael dancing, singing, directing with the precision of a maestro. Conducting his final symphony, the executors faced a choice: shelve it or monetize it. Within weeks, they greenlit a documentary film. This Is It premiered in October 2009, grossing $262 million worldwide, a figure that seemed almost obscene given the context. Yet it served a purpose both practical and poetic. It proved that Michael's artistry remained bankable. It purchased breathing room for the estate's accountants, and it offered fans a farewell that felt earned rather than opportunistic. But the real work lay ahead. The estate's second priority was to reconstruct Michael's library of unreleased material. Over decades, he'd recorded constantly besides alternate takes, sketches, full albums, abandoned mid-production. Vault Explorers cataloged the treasure. At least 100 complete, unreleased songs, hundreds of partial recordings, alternate mixes that remixed nostalgia itself. The executors appointed former Sony executive John McClane to oversee the archive, treating it as both museum and mine. Simultaneously, they negotiated with Cirque du Soleil, the acrobatic theater collective known for defying gravity and taste simultaneously. The result was Immortal, a show that premiered in 2011 and would eventually gross over $800 million, visiting continents and stadiums for over a decade. Unlike a film or album, a live show generated perpetual employment, perpetual ticket sales, and perpetual reintroduction of Michael's image to audiences born after his death. Then came the licensing boom that even Optimus had underestimated. Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, and YouTube transformed the global music landscape. Suddenly, every old recording became a new revenue stream. Michael's catalog, previously dependent on radio play, TV sync licenses, and the slow metabolism of physical media, could now be streamed infinitely by 6 billion smartphone users. At once, the per-stream royalty was minuscule, but volume was infinite. By 2012, Michael Jackson earned more annually than he had during his final 5 years alive. By 2014, the number had tripled again. The estate discovered a paradox. Death had liberated the catalog from the volatility of his personal narrative. No scandal could taint a song. No hospital stay could interrupt a stream. No tabloid rumor could hollow the magic out of Thriller when it was available on demand to a teenager in Mumbai or Sao Paulo. In 2014, the estate received an offer that forced a reckoning. Sony approached the executors with a proposal. The corporation would purchase Michael's 50% stake in Sony, a TV music publishing for $750 million. It was a number both enormous and oddly logical. A reflection of streaming's exponential ascent, a recognition that the catalog was worth more whole than partitioned, and a signal that Sony wanted clean ownership before technological disruption could splinter the industry further. The executors debated through the winter. Branca argued for the sale. Certain trustees advocated for holding, but the arithmetic eventually persuaded everyone. At $750 million, Michael's share of the joint venture had roughly doubled in value since 2009. Holding further risked concentration. The smart play was diversification. The sale closed in March 2016. $750 million landed in the estate's accounts, and immediately, the executors began what they called strategic allocation. A portion went to taxes, debts, and the children's trusts. Another chunk funded a $50 million endowment to support the Michael Jackson Foundation's charitable work. But the remaining hundreds of millions was deployed into an array of assets that would have delighted Michael's own imagination. Production companies, Broadway Ventures, real estate, and a mysterious entity called MyJack Music, which held his personal compositions and unreleased masters that no Sony partnership could ever touch. The unreleased material strategy proved prescient. In 2018, the estate released the duet Scream Again, a collaboration between Michael and his sister Janet, reconstructed from vault tapes and posthumous engineering. It went viral. The following year came Leaving Neverland, a documentary that wounded his legacy with allegations his lawyers would spend years refuting. But the estate's revenue machinery proved resilient. When Leaving Neverland aired, fans galvanized. Defensive streamed Michael's music at record levels. Tragedy and vindication became simultaneous. By 2019, Michael Jackson had ranked as the highest-earning musician in America for 4 consecutive years, a list that included only the living. Then came the pandemic of 2020, and with it, an unexpected acceleration. Locked indoors, audiences devoured entertainment archives. Michael's catalog became a comfort, a staple, a nostalgic anchor in an uncertain world. Thriller, which had debuted in 1983, found new audiences among children who had been born when their parents were not yet conceived. The music video, restored in 4K by the estate's archivists, premiered at movie theaters during theatrical dry spells. Schools adopted Thriller as a lesson in cultural legacy. Halloween costumes featured Michael's red jacket for the millionth time. The estate, watching from the shadows, realized that the gift of immortality in the streaming age was not merely financial, it was cultural multiplication. A feedback loop where each new generation discovered him, fell in love, and passed the love forward. By 2023, Forbes valued the Michael Jackson estate at $2.3 billion, making it one of the wealthiest celebrity legacies in history. Yet the executors knew this figure captured only the visible assets. There remained the question of image and likeness. Rights a legal territory barely mapped when Michael died, but now worth untold sums as technology enabled deepfakes, holograms, and AI-generated performances. There remained the biopic, finally greenlit, with a major studio that would revive his narrative for a generation raised on TikTok and streaming. There remained the unreleased vaults, carefully metered to extend revenue for decades. The last master recordings held back like a deck of cards, dealt one at a time. And there remained a final, almost poetic possibility that the executors whispered about only in closed-door meetings. That artificial intelligence might one day allow Michael Jackson's voice to sing new songs composed by contemporary artists in collaboration with algorithms and archives. Whether this constituted art or desecration remained a question for ethics, but the estate's lawyers had already begun drafting the contracts that would govern such futures. When you stand at the intersection of his legacy today, you realize that Michael Jackson's true genius was not confined to the stage or the studio. It lived in his understanding that ownership was destiny, that leverage was a form of dance, and that the greatest performance of all might not happen in his lifetime but in the centuries that followed. When his voice, liberated from the fragility of flesh, could circle the globe on invisible waves, earning, compounding, and proving that the king of pop had also been a king of capital, forever teaching the music industry that the only song worth singing is the one you own. The curtain falls, but the royalties rise, and somewhere in the archives of a vault that few will ever see, the next song waits, humming quietly in the dark, ready to remind the world once more why Michael Jackson's name is not inscribed in history, it is encoded in it, in every measure, every beat, every dollar that will flow forward until the last radio dies.